Welcome back to my channel, Curious Explorers. When you think of ancient Egypt, what comes to mind? Towering pyramids, golden treasures, and mystical mummies, right? But what if I told you there is a side to their civilization that's even more astonishing, hidden right under our noses? Forget the afterlife for a moment, and let's talk about life. The Egyptians had an incredibly advanced system of healthcare that was centuries ahead of its time. From skilled surgeons performing delicate operations to physicians who understood the body in ways that would baffle their contemporaries, their medical knowledge was revolutionary. In this series, we're peeling back the bandages to reveal the true secrets of their medicine. We'll explore how they treated illnesses, the sophisticated tools they used, and the surprising modernity of their approach to health. Join us as we journey beyond the tomb to uncover a world where ancient wisdom meets modern medicine. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our deep dive into the fascinating world of ancient Egyptian healthcare. Ever wondered what it was like to be a doctor in ancient Egypt? Was it all about magic spells and mysterious potions? Well, get ready to have your mind blown. Today, we're kicking off a deep dive into the fascinating world of ancient Egyptian medicine, and we're starting right at the top, with the doctors themselves. Let's begin with a simple but powerful phrase: physician, heal thyself. This idea wasn't just a saying in ancient Egypt. It was the foundation of a profession held in the highest esteem. Forget the image of a shaman chanting in a dark hut. The Egyptian doctor, or Swanui as they were called, was a figure of immense respect and authority. We're talking about individuals who are not just healers, but scholars, scientists, and often high-ranking officials in society. Think about it. In a civilization that built the pyramids, medicine couldn't have been a guessing game. It was a serious, structured profession. Many Swanui served the pharaoh directly, holding prestigious titles within the royal court. This wasn't just a job. It was a calling, a position of power and influence. Imagine being the personal physician to a living god. That level of trust speaks volumes about how valued their skills were. What's truly remarkable is the evidence of specialization we find. We see inscriptions referring to a chief of dentists, an eye doctor, a guardian of the anus. Yes, that was a real title for a proctologist, and even specialists in internal medicine. This suggests a sophisticated understanding of the human body, with different doctors focusing on distinct fields. This is thousands of years before modern medicine officially carved out its specialties. The ancient Egyptians were already laying the groundwork, recognizing that one person couldn't possibly master every aspect of health. So, how did one become a Swanwa? It was often a family affair. Medical knowledge was a precious heirloom, passed down from father to son, generation after generation. This created dynasties of doctors, where practical experience and treasured medical texts were preserved and built upon. It was an apprenticeship of the highest order. But it wasn't just about family connections. Egypt also had institutions that were essentially the world's first medical schools, known as the Houses of Life, or Per-Ankh. These were centers of learning attached to temples, where scribes and priests would meticulously copy and study medical papyri. Aspiring doctors would learn anatomy, diagnostic techniques, and treatments from these ancient texts. It was a formal education, combining empirical observation with a deep spiritual context. They studied texts like the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a document so clinically precise it could almost be a modern trauma surgery manual. Unlike some other ancient cultures, where sickness was seen purely as divine punishment, the Egyptians had a more nuanced view. Yes, they believed in gods and spiritual forces influencing health, and prayers and magical incantations were part of the healing process. But this is a huge, but they didn't stop there. The Swen were skilled empiricists. They observed symptoms, made diagnoses based on what they could see and feel, and applied practical treatments. They set broken bones with splints, stitched wounds, and performed complex surgeries. This unique blend of science and spirituality is what made the Egyptian doctor so special. They weren't just treating a disease. They were treating a whole person body and soul. They understood that the physical and the metaphysical were intertwined. This holistic approach is something modern medicine is only now beginning to fully appreciate again. They recognized the power of the placebo effect long before the term was ever coined, understanding that a patient's belief and mental state were crucial parts of the healing journey. Their status was cemented by their literacy and their role as scribes. In a society where most people couldn't read or write, the ability to command the written word was a form of power. Doctors were part of an educated elite, their knowledge recorded on papyrus scrolls that were guarded like treasure. They were the gatekeepers of life-saving information. The respect they commanded is evident in their burials. High-ranking physicians were often granted lavish tombs near the nobles and royals they served, a clear sign of their importance in the social hierarchy. Their titles and accomplishments were carved into the walls for eternity, a testament to a life spent healing. So, when we picture an ancient Egyptian doctor, we should envision a highly educated, respected professional. Someone who could diagnose an illness with a trained eye, set a fracture with a steady hand, and also offer a prayer to Sekhmet, the goddess of healing, for good measure. They were pioneers, blending practical science with profound belief, walking the fine line between the physical world and the divine. They weren't just practitioners. They were pillars of their community, guardians of life in one of history's greatest civilizations. This is just the beginning of our journey. The world of the Swenu is rich and complex, and we've only scratched the surface. Stay with us as we uncover more about their incredible tools, their groundbreaking surgical techniques, and their surprisingly effective medicines in the episodes to come. Imagine this. You're a young apprentice, your whole life ahead of you. Your classroom? The bustling corridors of a temple, the air thick with the scent of incense and papyrus. Your teachers aren't just academics. They're seasoned physicians, the Sinu, who have seen it all. Your days are spent poring over ancient texts, carefully copying medical papyri like the Ebers Papyrus or the Edwin Smith Papyrus. These weren't just homework. They were sacred documents, encyclopedias of diagnoses, remedies, and surgical procedures passed down through generations. But learning wasn't just about reading. It was deeply hands-on. Apprentices would shadow their mentors, observing them as they treated patients from all walks of life, from farmers with broken bones to nobles with mysterious illnesses. You'd learn to mix remedies from a vast pharmacopoeia of herbs, minerals, and animal products. Think honey for its antiseptic properties, willow bark for pain relief. Sound familiar? They were on to this thousands of years ago. And what about anatomy? This is where it gets really fascinating. While human dissection for purely scientific reasons wasn't common practice, the Egyptians had a unique window into the human body, the process of mummification. Priests and embalmers, who often worked closely with the House of Life, gained an unparalleled, albeit ritualistic, understanding of internal organs. They knew where the heart, lungs, and liver were located. This practical knowledge, even if filtered through a religious lens, was invaluable. Apprentices would learn about the body's structure through observation and the study of detailed anatomical texts. The curriculum was incredibly holistic. It wasn't enough to just know how to set a bone. Healing in ancient Egypt was a blend of science and spirituality. So, alongside practical medicine, students would learn theology, magic, and astrology. A physician needed to know the right incantations to recite to appease the gods, as illness was often seen as a divine punishment or the result of a malevolent spirit. You'd learn which deities governed which parts of the body, like Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of healing and plague. A complete treatment plan might involve a physical poultice, a prescribed diet, and a specific prayer to be chanted at sunrise. It was a truly integrated approach to well-being, treating the body and soul as one. These houses of life were the epicenters of knowledge. They weren't just teaching hospitals. They were research institutions and libraries, actively preserving, copying, and advancing medical understanding. Scribes worked tirelessly to ensure that successful treatments and new observations were recorded for posterity. This created a legacy of learning, a chain of knowledge passed from master to apprentice, ensuring that the art of healing not only survived, but flourished for millennia along the banks of the Nile. Was in these sacred halls that the very foundations of Western medicine were laid, one papyrus scroll at a time. This system produced physicians who were highly respected members of society. There was even a hierarchy, with general practitioners, P-E-C-I-A-L, ISTs like dentists, known as those who deal with teeth, and even proctologists, and at the very top, the chief physician who often served the pharaoh himself. To graduate from a house of life was to join an elite group entrusted with the most precious commodity of all, life itself. Their rigorous, multifaceted training ensured they were more than just healers. They were guardians of both physical and spiritual health, wielding medical tools and sacred words with equal skill. So, the next time you visit a doctor, take a moment to think back to these ancient Egyptian pioneers. Their dedication to learning, their blend of the practical and the spiritual, and their commitment to preserving knowledge in the houses of life created a ripple effect that can still be felt in the medical world today. They were the original trailblazers, proving that the quest to understand and heal the human body is one of the oldest and most noble journeys of all. So, what exactly are these papyri? Imagine a scroll, sometimes over 60 feet long, filled with intricate hieratic script, a kind of cursive hieroglyphics. These were the encyclopedias, the WebMD, and the surgical manuals of their day, all rolled into one. They were meticulously copied by scribes, preserving medical knowledge across generations. Finding one of these intact is like discovering a time capsule from the world as first great civilization. And the secrets they hold are absolutely astonishing. Let's start with the Ebers Papyrus. Discovered in the 19th century, this scroll is one of the longest and best preserved medical documents from antiquity. Dated to around 1550 BCE, it's essentially a comprehensive medical encyclopedia. It contains over 700 magical formulas and remedies for a vast array of ailments. From digestive problems and eye diseases to skin conditions and even dentistry, the Ebers Papyrus covers it all. You'd find prescriptions for things we still recognize today, like using honey as an antiseptic dressing for wounds, or willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin for pain and inflammation. Of course, it wasn't all so scientific. Many remedies were a blend of practical medicine and magic. You might find a recipe for a poultice made of herbs and minerals, accompanied by an incantation to be recited over the patient to drive out the malevolent spirits believed to be causing the illness. This shows us that for the Egyptians, healing the body and soothing the spirit were two sides of the same coin. The papyrus also includes chapters on gynecology, contraception, and even how to diagnose pregnancy. It's an unbelievably detailed look at the everyday health concerns of people living thousands of years ago. Now, if the Ebers Papyrus is the family doctor's guide, then the Edwin Smith Papyrus is the emergency room surgeon's textbook. And honestly, this one is a game changer. It is slightly older than the Ebers Papyrus and is considered by many to be the single most important medical document from ancient Egypt and perhaps the entire ancient world. Why? Because it's almost entirely devoid of magic. It's a work of pure, rational, scientific observation. The Edwin Smith Papyrus is a surgical treatise that deals with trauma, specifically injuries to the head, neck, and torso, laid out in a systematic head-to-toe order. It presents 48 clinical cases, each one structured in a way that would be familiar to any modern medical student. First, there's the title, like instructions concerning a gaping wound in the head. Then comes the examination, where the physician is instructed to observe and palpate the injury. This is followed by a diagnosis and, most impressively, a prognosis. This is where it gets really interesting. The physician would declare one of three prognoses for each case. The first was, "An ailment which I will treat," meaning the doctor was confident they could achieve a cure. The second was, "An ailment with which I will contend," indicating a more challenging case where the outcome was uncertain, but treatment was still possible. The third, and perhaps most telling, was "an ailment not to be treated." This demonstrates an incredible level of honesty and practicality. The Egyptian surgeon recognized the limits of their abilities and knew when an injury was simply too severe to fix. They wouldn't waste resources or give false hope. Let's look at one of the cases to see just how advanced it was. Case number 6 describes a patient with a gaping wound in the head that has penetrated to the bone, shattering the skull. The text describes the physician observing corrugations on the surface of the brain, comparing them to the ripples on molten copper. This is the earliest known written description of the cerebral cortex in human history. The papyrus then details how to treat it. Clean the wound, apply a dressing of honey and lint, and keep the patient on a specific diet. The level of detail and the logical approach are simply mind-blowing for a document that's over 3.5 millennia old. The papyrus also describes techniques like stitching wounds closed with a needle and thread, using splints and bandages to set broken bones, and even how to reduce a dislocated jaw. It details signs of spinal cord injury, noting that paralysis in the arms and legs was linked to damage in the neck. These physicians were making connections between specific injuries and their systemic effects on the body, a foundational concept in medicine. The Edwin Smith Papyrus isn't just a collection of remedies. It's a testament to the scientific method in action, thousands of years before the Greeks, who are often credited with its invention. So what do these two papyri tell us when we look at them together? They show us a medical system that was both deeply spiritual and remarkably scientific. On one hand, you have the Ebers Papyrus, with its blend of herbal remedies and magical spells, reflecting the belief that illness could be caused by gods, demons, or curses. This was the holistic approach, treating the physical and the metaphysical. On the other hand, the Edwin Smith Papyrus reveals a pragmatic, evidence-based approach to trauma surgery, where careful observation and logical deduction were paramount. This duality is what made Egyptian medicine so unique. It wasn't a contradiction to them. It was a complete system. You might set a broken arm with a splint, a purely practical procedure, but you might also say a prayer to ensure the bone healed correctly and to protect the patient from infection-causing demons. It was a belt and suspenders approach to healthcare. They used every tool they had, both in the physical world and the spiritual one, to fight for their patients' lives. These ancient scrolls completely revolutionize our understanding of the ancient world. They prove that the Egyptians weren't just master builders and astronomers. They were also pioneering physicians and surgeons. They laid the groundwork for medical practice, emphasizing clinical examination, diagnosis, and prognosis in a way that would echo through the corridors of history, influencing the Greeks, the Romans, and ultimately, modern medicine itself. These papyri are more than just ancient paper. They are a profound legacy of human ingenuity and our timeless quest to understand and heal the human body. Think about it. When you have a toothache, you don't go to your family doctor, right? You go to a dentist. If your vision gets blurry, you see an eye doctor. It seems obvious to us now, but this idea of having doctors for specific parts of the body was revolutionary thousands of years ago. Most ancient cultures had a single type of healer, a general practitioner who handled everything from a broken bone to a bad stomach. But the Egyptians? They were different. We have incredible evidence from ancient papyri and tomb inscriptions that reveals a surprisingly complex healthcare system. Imagine walking through an ancient Egyptian city and seeing signs, well, hieroglyphs for different kinds of doctors. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical texts, mentions various practitioners. We find references to figures we would now call ophthalmologists, or physicians of the eyes, who dealt exclusively with eye ailments. This makes perfect sense when you consider how common eye issues like trachoma must have been, thanks to the sun, sand, and dust of the Nile Valley. And it doesn't stop there. There were shepherds of the anus, which sounds a bit funny to our modern ears, but these were essentially their gastroenterologists or proctologists, specialists in digestive and bowel problems. They understood that the gut was a complex system requiring specific knowledge. One of the most fascinating examples is the existence of early dentists. We have found skeletons from ancient Egypt with evidence of sophisticated dental work. Skulls show signs of drilled cavities, abscess drainage, and even prosthetic teeth made from donor teeth, bound together with gold wire. One inscription mentions a man named Hesera, who lived around 2600 BCE and is often cited as the world's first known dentist. His title was Chief of the Toothers and the Physicians. Can you believe that? A chief of dentists, nearly 5,000 years ago. It shows that dental care was not just a side gig. It was a recognized and respected profession. This level of specialization suggests a highly organized society. It means they had medical schools or training systems capable of passing on this specific knowledge. A doctor couldn't just learn everything. They had to focus. This division of labor allowed for a deeper understanding of specific conditions. An eye doctor would have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of eye cases, allowing them to recognize patterns and develop more effective treatments than a general healer ever could. Let's also not forget the Suen Wi, the general term for a physician, and the Waba, who were purificatory priests often involved in healing rituals. But within the Suen, this branching out into different fields was key. There were even physicians who specialized in what we might call internal medicine, and get this, veterinarians. That's right, the ancient Egyptians cared for their animals' health too, especially valuable livestock. We have texts describing treatments for cattle, showing they applied their medical principles beyond just humans. This structure is a testament to their advanced medical thought. They recognized that the human body was too complex for one person to master entirely. By creating specialists, they were able to pool their collective knowledge and provide more targeted and effective care. This wasn't just a haphazard collection of healers. It was a system. A system where a patient could, in theory, be referred from a general physician to a specialist for a specific problem. It really paints a picture of a society that valued health and invested heavily in understanding the body. They weren't just treating symptoms with magic and prayers. They were observing, documenting, and organizing their knowledge in a way that feels remarkably modern. The fact that a farmer with an eye infection and a pharaoh with a toothache could both seek out a specialist is truly extraordinary for the time. It speaks volumes about the sophistication and depth of ancient Egyptian civilization. So, the next time you visit a specialist, take a moment to think about the ancient Egyptians. They laid down some of the earliest foundations for the very system we rely on today. It's just another reason why this ancient culture continues to fascinate and inspire us. How did these ancient practitioners approach their craft? Did they have a moral compass, a set of rules that guided them? Let's explore the ethics and professionalism of the ancient Egyptian doctor. Now, when we think of medical ethics, the first thing that probably comes to mind is the Hippocratic Oath, right? That famous pledge, first, do no harm. But what if I told you that long before Hippocrates, the physicians of the Nile Valley were already operating under a sophisticated, unwritten code of conduct? While we haven't found a single formal Egyptian oath etched in stone, the evidence of their ethical framework is woven throughout their medical papyri, their tomb inscriptions, and the very structure of their medical system. It's a compelling story of duty, observation, and a profound commitment to the patient. So where do we find these clues? Let's start with the medical texts themselves, like the famous Ebers and Edwin Smith papyri. These weren't just random collections of remedies. They were highly structured, almost like modern medical textbooks. Each case is presented in a specific, consistent format. First, the title, like instructions for a gaping wound in the head. Then, a detailed examination, noting every observable symptom. This is followed by a diagnosis, and most importantly, a prognosis. This prognosis is a critical piece of the ethical puzzle. The physician would declare one of three outcomes: an ailment I will treat, an ailment I will contend with, or an ailment not to be treated. This wasn't about giving up on patients. It was about honesty and managing expectations. A doctor who declared they would treat a condition was staking their reputation on a positive outcome. By identifying untreatable cases, they were acting with a kind of compassionate realism, preventing false hope and the suffering of futile interventions. This triage system demonstrates a deep sense of responsibility. They understood the limits of their knowledge and were honest about it, which is a cornerstone of ethical practice even today. Imagine the scene. A patient is brought to a temple, perhaps with a severe injury from a construction accident at a pyramid site. The physician doesn't just start mixing herbs or chanting incantations. First, they observe. They look, they listen, they touch. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, in particular, is a masterclass in this. It details a head-to-toe examination process, systematic and thorough. The doctor would feel the pulse, check the color of the skin, inspect the wound, and ask the patient questions. This emphasis on rational observation over pure magic shows a professional, almost scientific approach. They were gathering data, forming a hypothesis, and only then deciding on a course of action. This methodical process ensured a standard of care. It wasn't about one doctor's whim. It was about following an established, tested protocol that aimed for the best possible outcome for the patient. Furthermore, let's talk about the idea of consistency. These papyri served as a shared body of knowledge. A physician in Memphis would, in theory, be following the same diagnostic steps for a dislocated jaw as a physician in Thebes. This standardization, learned in institutions known as the Houses of Life, ensured a level of quality control across the kingdom. These Houses of Life were part library, part scriptorium, and part university. This is where medical knowledge was preserved, copied, and taught to the next generation of physicians. The very existence of these centers points to a system that valued expertise, peer review, and the careful transmission of professional standards. You didn't just become a doctor. You were trained, you studied, and you became part of a tradition that held itself to a high standard. The social standing of physicians also tells us something about their professional role. Senior physicians held respected titles like chief of physicians and often served the pharaoh and the elite. But medicine wasn't just for the rich. Evidence from worker villages like Deir el-Medina shows that common laborers also received medical care. There were state-employed doctors assigned to work sites. This suggests a societal belief that health was a priority and that providing care was a professional duty, not just a lucrative business. These doctors were compensated by the state, which reduced the potential for them to exploit patients for financial gain. Their primary role was to keep the workforce healthy, an incredibly practical, but also ethical, function within their society. We also see an element of specialization that speaks to a professional mindset. We have inscriptions mentioning doctors who are guardians of the anus, eye doctors, and dentists known as those who deal with teeth. This wasn't a free-for-all where one person claimed to cure everything. Specialization implies a deep respect for the complexity of the human body and an understanding that true expertise requires focused study. A doctor who recognized a problem was outside their specific area of knowledge would likely refer the patient to a specialist. This network of professionals working together for the patient's good is a hallmark of an advanced and ethically minded medical community. So, while the ancient Egyptians may not have left us a poetic oath to recite, their actions speak louder than words. Their meticulous record-keeping wasn't just for posterity. It was for creating a reliable, repeatable system of medicine. Their honest prognoses weren't a sign of pessimism. They were a pact of transparency with the patient. Their structured schools weren't just buildings. They were centers for upholding professional standards. They created a system that prioritized observation, valued knowledge, and was built on a foundation of duty to the patient. They understood that to heal the body, you first need a healthy dose of ethics and professionalism. It's a legacy that, in many ways, set the stage for the next 3,000 years of medical practice. Forget everything you thought you knew about ancient medicine being just magic and prayers. The Egyptians were masters of practical, hands-on healing, especially when it came to dealing with brutal injuries. Our guide on this journey? An extraordinary document known as the Edwin Smith Papyrus. So, what exactly is this papyrus? Think of it as the world's oldest surviving surgical textbook. Written around 1600 BC, it's believed to be a copy of an even older text, possibly from the mind of the legendary architect and physician, Imhotep. Unlike other medical papyri filled with spells, the Edwin Smith Papyrus is astonishingly rational and scientific. It contains 48 case studies of trauma, laid out in a way that would be familiar to any modern doctor. It's a step-by-step guide to dealing with everything from a dislocated jaw to a crushed vertebra. Let's dive into a specific case to see just how brilliant these ancient doctors were. Case number 6 describes a gaping wound in the head, exposing the bone of the skull. The instruction is precise. Thou shouldst probe his wound. The physician is told to examine the injury, clean it, and then stitch it closed using a needle and thread. The papyrus even instructs the doctor to apply a dressing of fresh meat on the first day to reduce swelling, followed by a poultice of honey and lint. Why honey? It's a natural antiseptic and antibacterial agent, something we've only fully appreciated in modern times. This wasn't guesswork. It was applied science. The level of detail is just astounding. For a dislocated mandible, that's your jaw, the papyrus gives clear instructions. It says, Thou shouldst place thy 2 thumbs upon the end of the 2 rami of the mandible ... and thou shouldst bring them down. This is the exact same technique, known as the Hippocratic method, that doctors and paramedics use today to reset a dislocated jaw. To think that this procedure was documented and practiced successfully over 3,500 years ago is just mind-blowing. It shows a profound, practical understanding of human anatomy. And it wasn't just about jaws and head wounds. The Egyptians were expert bone setters. The papyrus details how to identify different types of fractures, from a simple crack to a complex shattered bone. The treatment plan was just as methodical. First, realign the broken bone. How? Through careful manipulation, feeling the bones to ensure they were perfectly aligned. This is a skill that takes modern orthopedic surgeons years to master. Yet ancient Egyptian physicians were doing it with their bare hands. Once the bone was set, the next step was immobilization. The Egyptians were masters of splinting. They would take pieces of wood, bark, or even stiff linen soaked in resin, and wrap them tightly around the fractured limb with bandages. This created a rigid cast, not unlike the plaster casts we use today. This prevented movement, allowing the bone to heal in the correct position. It was a simple, effective, and incredibly advanced technique for the time. But how do we know they were actually successful? The proof isn't just in the papyrus. It's in the bones themselves. Archaeologists have discovered numerous mummies with evidence of healed fractures. And we're not talking about messy, misaligned healing. X-rays of these ancient bones reveal fractures that have been set with almost perfect anatomical alignment. You can see a clean, strong callus of new bone growth, bridging the break, a clear sign that the limb was properly immobilized and healed correctly. These silent witnesses, preserved for millennia, prove that the instructions in the Edwin Smith Papyrus were not just theory. They were a highly effective and widely practiced standard of care. The papyrus also didn't shy away from the most severe injuries. It describes injuries to the spine, chest, and skull with a chillingly objective eye. The author categorized each case with one of three prognoses. First, an ailment which I will treat. This was a case the physician was confident they could cure. Second, an ailment with which I will contend. This was a more serious case, the outcome uncertain, but still worth fighting for. And third, the most sobering verdict. An ailment not to be treated. This was a diagnosis for injuries deemed fatal, where the physician's role was simply to make the patient comfortable. This triage system, this ability to assess a situation and make a difficult call, is the very foundation of modern emergency medicine. It's truly incredible. When you picture an ancient Egyptian doctor, you might imagine a priest chanting incantations. But the reality, as revealed by the Edwin Smith Papyrus, is so much more impressive. These were pragmatic, observant, and highly skilled clinicians. They understood the importance of hygiene, using antiseptics like honey. They mastered complex physical manipulations to set bones and dislocated joints. They even had a system for classifying injuries and predicting outcomes. They were, in the truest sense of the word, surgeons. The next time you see a mummy in a museum, take a moment to appreciate not just the person who lived, but the incredible medical knowledge that might have healed them during their lifetime. We touched upon the incredible knowledge these ancient healers possessed. But knowledge alone isn't enough to perform surgery. You need the right tools. And what the Egyptians had might just shock you. Forget the image of primitive, clumsy implements. We're talking about a surgical kit that wouldn't look entirely out of place in a modern operating room. So let's open up this ancient toolbox and see what's inside. What you're looking at here are replicas of instruments found in tombs and depicted on temple walls, like the famous physician's relief at Kamumbu. The first thing you'll notice is the material. Bronze. It was durable, could be sharpened to a very fine edge, and was relatively easy to work with. Now, take a look at this. This is a scalpel. See that elegant leaf-shaped blade and the slender handle? It was designed for precision, for making clean incisions. Can you imagine a surgeon, over 3,000 years ago, holding this exact tool, their hands steady, as they prepared to cut into skin to drain an abscess or remove a surface tumor? It's not a crude knife. It's a specialized instrument. And they didn't just have one type. There were different shapes and sizes for different tasks, showing a remarkable level of specialization. Next up, we have forceps and pincers. Look at the variety here. Some are long and delicate, perfect for grasping and removing small, foreign objects from a wound. Think splinters, shards of pottery, or even arrowheads. Others are more robust, like these crushing forceps, which might have been used in procedures like circumcision, or even to clamp bleeding vessels. The design, with its simple pincer action, is so effective that it has remained fundamentally unchanged for millennia. When you see a modern surgeon use forceps, they are using a tool whose direct ancestor was held in the hand of an Egyptian physician. But what about more intensive procedures? What if a surgeon needed to deal with bone? Well, they had a tool for that too. This is an ancient bone saw. The serrated edge, the sturdy handle, it's unmistakably a saw. This would have been essential for amputations. A grim, but sometimes necessary procedure on the ancient battlefield, or for more complex orthopedic work. Using this would have required immense strength and skill, not just to cut through bone, but to do so in a way that minimized damage to the surrounding tissue. The fact that they even attempted such procedures speaks volumes about their confidence and capabilities. Let's move on to something a bit more delicate. These long, slender instruments are probes and spatulas. Probes were the surgeon's eyes and fingers when exploring the unknown. They could be used to investigate the depth and direction of a wound without making it larger, to check for broken bones, or to explore cavities like the nose or ear. The spatulas, with their flattened ends, were perfect for applying ointments, salves, and bandages. They allowed the physician to spread medicine evenly over a wound without contaminating it with their hands. A basic but crucial principle of hygiene. And here's something that might really surprise you. Drills. Yes, you heard that right. Archaeologists have found evidence of cranial drills, known as trephines. These were used for a procedure called trepanation drilling, a hole into the skull. Now, why on earth would they do that? Ancient physicians believed it could relieve pressure on the brain, perhaps from a head injury, or release evil spirits they thought were causing headaches or seizures. It sounds terrifying, and it was incredibly dangerous, but astonishingly, skeletal remains show that many patients actually survived this procedure. The healed bone around the hole tells us that people lived for years after having their skulls drilled by an Egyptian surgeon. This is a testament not only to the surgeon's skill with the drill, but also to their understanding of post-operative care. Let's pause and think about what this all means. The existence of these specialized tool scalpels, forceps, saws, probes, and drills proves that Egyptian surgery was far from a primitive hack-and-slash affair. Each instrument was designed with a specific function in mind. The design reflects a deep, practical understanding of surgical mechanics, the need for precision, the ability to grip and manipulate tissue, the power to cut through bone, and the finesse to explore delicate areas. These weren't just random pieces of metal. They were the product of centuries of observation, practice, and innovation. A physician would have chosen their tools for a procedure with the same care a modern surgeon does. They would have understood the strengths and limitations of each one. The similarity of these ancient instruments to those used much later by the Greeks, Romans, and even surgeons in the Renaissance is no coincidence. The Egyptians laid the groundwork. They figured out the basic designs that worked, and that knowledge was passed down through the ages. When we look at these objects, we are looking at the very dawn of surgery as a craft. We can almost feel the weight of the bronze in our hands and imagine the steady focus required to use them. These tools allowed ancient doctors to drain abscesses with precision, to repair traumatic wounds from construction accidents or battles, to set fractures, and even to perform delicate operations on the head and face. They weren't just treating symptoms with herbs and magic. They were physically intervening, cutting into the body to fix what was broken. This collection of instruments represents a massive leap forward in human history. It is the moment we moved from simply hoping for the best to actively shaping our own medical destiny. These ancient surgeons, with their bronze toolkits, were true pioneers. They faced challenges we can barely imagine. No modern anesthetics, no antibiotics, and only a rudimentary understanding of germs. Yet, with these tools, they healed, they saved lives, and they pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. It's a powerful reminder that innovation isn't just a modern phenomenon. The drive to heal, to mend, and to overcome the frailties of the human body is as old as civilization itself. And it all started with brave individuals picking up tools like these, taking a deep breath, and making that first critical incision. We're opening the door to a world where nature was the ultimate medicine cabinet, especially when it came to managing pain. Imagine an Egyptian physician, scrolls in hand, carefully preparing a remedy. For someone suffering from intense pain, perhaps from a severe injury or after a primitive surgery, they had a powerful tool, the opium poppy. Yes, you heard that right. The Egyptians knew about the potent pain-relieving properties of opium. They would administer it to dull, excruciating pain, offering a level of relief that was nothing short of miraculous for the time. This wasn't just guesswork. It was calculated medicine, a way to make unbearable situations manageable. They understood the power locked within this vibrant flower and used it to bring comfort to the suffering. It shows a deep understanding of pharmacology, long before the word even existed. But what about more common, everyday aches and pains? Things like fevers, joint stiffness, or a nagging toothache. For these, the Egyptians turned to another natural wonder, the willow tree. They would use parts of the willow, particularly the bark, to create remedies. What they knew through experience, we now know through science. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, a natural compound that would centuries later become the basis for one of the most common drugs in the world, aspirin. Think about that for a moment. Every time you pop an aspirin for a headache, you reconnected to a tradition of pain relief that stretches back thousands of years to the banks of the Nile. The Egyptians were masters of observation, figuring out that chewing on this bark or brewing it into a tea could reduce fever and ease inflammation. It's a testament to their incredible empirical knowledge of the world around them. The Egyptian pharmacy didn't stop there. Their list of plant-based remedies was extensive and surprisingly sophisticated. They used celery and saffron for joint pain, which we now know have anti-inflammatory properties. For digestive troubles and cramping, they might prescribe mint. Another plant that appears in their medical texts is one that's very familiar today, cannabis. While its exact uses are still debated by historians, papyri suggest it was used for a variety of ailments, possibly including pain relief and inflammation. The Egyptians weren't just randomly picking plants. They were building a complex system of medicine based on generations of trial, error, and success. They cataloged plants, noted their effects, and passed this vital knowledge down. It was a living, breathing science. Beyond just dulling physical pain, the Egyptians also recognized the connection between the mind and body. They used other sedatives and tranquilizers to calm patients. Plants like blue lotus were used for their gentle, calming effects, helping to ease anxiety and promote rest, which is crucial for healing. This approach shows a holistic view of health. It wasn't just about fixing a broken bone or stopping a pain signal. It was about treating the whole person. They understood that alleviating suffering, whether physical or mental, was a core part of the physician's duty. This compassionate dimension adds a profound depth to our understanding of their medical practices. They weren't just technicians. They were healers, striving to bring comfort and peace to their patients, using the tools nature provided. Let's take a closer look at how these remedies were actually prepared and administered. It wasn't as simple as just handing someone a plant. Egyptian physicians were also skilled pharmacists. They would grind ingredients with a mortar and pestle, just as a pharmacist might today. They would mix herbs with honey, which not only made the medicine taste better, but also acted as a natural preservative and had its own antibacterial properties. They created pills by mixing powdered ingredients with bread dough or grease. They made medicinal beers and wines, infusing them with specific herbs to deliver the remedy in a liquid form. They even made topical treatments, creating poultices and ointments to apply directly to wounds or sore joints. Each ailment had a corresponding form of delivery, carefully chosen for maximum effect. This level of detail shows a truly professional approach to medicine. This ancient knowledge wasn't just lost to the sands of time. The medical texts of the Egyptians, like the famous Ebers Papyrus, were studied and respected for centuries. Their understanding of pain relief and medicinal plants influenced later civilizations, including the Greeks and Romans, who built upon the foundations the Egyptians had laid. The Greek physician Dioscorides, in his foundational work, De Materia Medica, described many of the same plants used by the Egyptians, like willow and poppy. This knowledge then flowed into the Islamic Golden Age and eventually into medieval Europe, forming a continuous thread of medical history. So the legacy of the Egyptian pharmacy is not just a historical curiosity. It's a living part of our own medical heritage. It is a powerful reminder that our quest to understand and alleviate pain is a journey that humanity has been on for millennia. So the next time you reach for a pain reliever, take a moment to appreciate the incredible history behind that simple act. We're standing on the shoulders of giants ancient Egyptian physicians who, with their deep respect for nature and their compassionate drive to heal, laid the groundwork for modern medicine. They were true pioneers, using poppies, willow, and a vast botanical pharmacy to fight one of humanity's oldest enemies, pain. Their ingenuity and empathy continue to inspire us thousands of years later. That throbbing, relentless pain that makes it impossible to think about anything else. Now, imagine you're living 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt. No modern painkillers, no high-tech drills. What would you do? You might be surprised to learn that the ancient Egyptians had their own dedicated dentists and some surprisingly sophisticated ways to deal with dental disasters. So today, we're journeying back in time to uncover the fascinating and sometimes wince-inducing world of ancient Egyptian dentistry. You won't look at your toothbrush the same way again. First, let's set the scene. Life along the Nile was a blessing, but the Egyptian diet was a curse for their teeth. Their daily bread was a staple, but the stone used to grind the grain would leave behind tiny, gritty particles of sand and rock. Every single bite was like sandpaper on their enamel. This constant grinding wore their teeth down to the pulp, exposing nerves and creating the perfect entry point for bacteria. On top of that, the desert sand got into everything, making their food even more abrasive. As a result, almost every Egyptian, from the pharaoh in his palace to the farmer in the field, suffered from severe dental problems. We're talking about extreme wear, painful abscesses, and widespread tooth loss. It was a national dental crisis. So, how did they fight back? Well, they developed a specialized field of medicine. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical texts in the world, mentions practitioners who dealt specifically with ailments of the teeth and gums. These were the world's first named dentists. One of the earliest known is a man named Hesira, who lived around 2600 BCE. His tomb inscription proudly calls him Chief of Dentists and Physicians. This title alone shows us that dentistry wasn't just a side gig for a general doctor. It was a respected and distinct profession. These specialists were tasked with treating the dental woes of the elite, and the evidence they left behind on mummies is absolutely mind-blowing. When archaeologists began examining mummies with modern technology like X-rays and CT scans, they unveiled a hidden history of dental intervention. They found skulls with teeth that had been meticulously drilled. Imagine that for a moment. Drilling into a tooth with a hand-powered bow drill. The goal was likely to drain a painful abscess, a pus-filled infection at the root of a tooth. Relieving that pressure would have brought immense, immediate relief from agonizing pain. It was a risky procedure, no doubt, but for someone suffering, it would have been a godsend. These weren't clumsy hacks. The precision of some of these holes suggests a deep understanding of tooth anatomy. It shows they knew asterisk or asterisk to drill to solve the problem, a testament to their observational skills. But they didn't just stop at drilling. The Egyptians also experimented with what we might call prosthetics. While tooth extraction was common, sometimes the only solution for a rotten tooth, they also tried to save loose teeth. Mummies have been discovered with teeth bound together using gold or silver wire. Think of it as an ancient dental splint. This would stabilize a wobbly tooth by attaching it to its stronger neighbors, allowing the person to keep their tooth for longer. In a few very rare and remarkable cases, they even created rudimentary bridges. One famous example shows a donor tooth, or perhaps a tooth that had fallen out and been reinserted wired into a gap in the jaw. While these were likely more cosmetic than functional, especially for the elite who needed to look their best in life and the afterlife, it shows an incredible ambition to restore a complete smile. It's the very beginning of restorative dentistry. Of course, their medicine cabinet was also filled with natural remedies. The Ebers Papyrus, another key medical text, is like an ancient Egyptian pharmacy guide, and it's packed with recipes for oral health. For a simple toothache, they might recommend a poultice made of dough, honey, and incense, applied directly to the sore spot. For gum disease, A major problem then, as it is now, they had various rinses and pastes. One recipe called for ground-up barley, honey, and a plant called ochre to be rubbed on the gums. Honey was a brilliant choice. We now know it has natural antibacterial properties, so they were inadvertently fighting the infection. Other ingredients included figs, cumin, and onion, a potent mix that aimed to reduce inflammation and kill pain. They were essentially practicing herbal medicine, specifically for the mouth. And what about prevention? Did they have toothbrushes and toothpaste? Well, sort of. While they didn't have nylon bristles, they did practice oral hygiene. Evidence suggests they used chew sticks. These were twigs from specific plants, where one end would be frayed by chewing it, creating a soft, brush-like implement to clean the teeth. The other end could be sharpened into a point to act as a toothpick. As for toothpaste, recipes have been found that include ingredients like crushed rock salt, mint, dried iris flowers, and pepper, all ground into a fine powder. A papyrus from the Roman era of Egypt even gives a precise recipe for a powder for white and perfect teeth. When I tried to find out what that would be like, some historians who've tried to replicate it described it as quite abrasive and pungent, but it probably did a decent job of scrubbing away stains and freshening the breath. However, we need to be realistic. Despite all this ingenuity, ancient Egyptian dentistry had its limits. There's no solid evidence that they performed tooth extractions with specialized tools. It was more likely a brutal process of knocking the tooth out. There's also no evidence of fillings as we know them. Once a cavity formed, there was little they could do to stop the decay. And while their treatments could provide temporary relief, infections could still be deadly. Many mummies show signs of dental abscesses that spread to the jawbone and beyond, leading to systemic infections that were ultimately fatal. A pharaoh could rule an empire, but could still be brought down by a bad tooth. It's a humbling reminder of how far we've come. But looking back, what the Egyptians accomplished is nothing short of extraordinary. They identified dentistry as a unique medical field. They developed surgical procedures to treat abscesses, created prosthetics to stabilize teeth, and compounded herbal medicines to manage pain and infection. They understood the importance of oral hygiene and were actively trying to prevent dental disease. They were true pioneers, pushing the boundaries of what was medically possible thousands of years ago. Their focus on relieving pain and preserving health reveals a deep-seated human desire to live free from discomfort, a desire that connects us directly to them across the millennia. So the next time you brush your teeth with your minty toothpaste or visit your dentist for a checkup in a clean, sterile office, take a moment to think of Ra and his colleagues along the Nile. They were the first to declare war on toothaches, using grit, ingenuity, and a little bit of gold wire. Their legacy isn't just in the mummies they treated, but in the very foundation of the dental care we so often take for granted today. Ever wondered how ancient civilizations cared for people with disabilities? Let's travel back to ancient Egypt, where ingenuity wasn't just for building pyramids. In the world of medicine, they were making incredible strides, especially in prosthetics and rehabilitation. It's a side of Egypt you've likely never seen before. Imagine losing a toe, a small but crucial part for balance and walking. Now, imagine an ancient doctor crafting a replacement for you. Archaeologists have unearthed exactly that. Prosthetic toes, some carved from wood, others fashioned from a mix of materials like leather and glue. The most famous one, the Greville-Chester Great Toe, dates back over 3,000 years. It shows clear signs of wear and tear, proving it wasn't just a cosmetic piece for burial. It was a functional device, attached with leather straps that helped someone walk again. Another example, the Cairo toe, was made of cartonnage, a kind of ancient papier-mâché hand, was intricately designed to bend just like a real toe. Think about the craftsmanship, the understanding of anatomy, the sheer desire to restore mobility. This wasn't just about patching someone up. It was about giving them back their independence. These finds challenge our whole perception of ancient medicine. We often think of the past as a brutal time, where a severe injury was a death sentence. But in Egypt, evidence suggests otherwise. We have skeletal remains that show healed, life-altering injuries fractures that would have been crippling without intervention. Take, for example, the case of a man with a leg amputated below the knee. His bones show signs of healing that indicate he lived for many years after the surgery. This is monumental. It means there was post-operative care. It means someone was cleaning the wound, managing pain, and helping the person adapt. This wasn't a one-off procedure. It was a process of rehabilitation. This level of care points to a deep-seated compassion within their society. These weren't just skilled surgeons. They were caregivers. They understood that a person's value didn't diminish with a disability. Their goal was to improve the quality of life. This commitment is what makes their medical achievements so profound. They were pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible, combining surgical skill with a genuine drive to help people live full lives. It shows a society that invested in its people, not just its monuments. The knowledge behind this wasn't just guesswork. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in the world, details 48 cases of traumatic injury. It describes examinations, diagnoses, and treatments with astonishing clinical precision. For a broken arm, it advises splinting it with linen and a mixture of honey and resin honey, being a natural antiseptic. This systematic approach tells us they were learning, recording their findings, and passing down this knowledge through generations. It was a true medical science in its infancy. So what does this all mean? It means the ancient Egyptians had a surprisingly modern outlook on healthcare. They saw the human body as a complex system and believed in intervening to fix it. They developed surgical tools, practiced hygiene, and created functional prosthetics. More importantly, they followed through with rehabilitation, ensuring their patients had the best possible chance at a normal life. This wasn't just medicine. It was a philosophy of care, a testament to their humanity. When we look at these ancient artifacts, the worn wooden toe, the carefully set bones, we're not just looking at old objects. We're looking at stories of survival, of innovation, and of a society that cared. The next time you think of ancient Egypt, remember that their legacy isn't just written in stone. It's also etched in the very bones of the people they healed, a timeless reminder of the enduring human spirit. Let's start with the most extensive category, herbs. The fertile Nile Valley was a botanical treasure trove, and the Egyptians knew it. They cultivated and gathered hundreds of plants for medicinal use. We're talking about common herbs you might even have in your own kitchen today, like mint and thyme. Mint wasn't just for a refreshing tea. It was used to soothe stomach pains and aid digestion. Thyme, with its strong aromatic properties, was likely used as an antiseptic. But their herbal knowledge went far beyond simple kitchen remedies. One of the most frequently mentioned ingredients in the medical papyri is the castor oil plant. They used its oil as a powerful laxative, a practice that continues in some forms of traditional medicine even today. They also utilized plants like senna for similar purgative effects, showing they understood how different plants could achieve similar results. Willow and myrtle were used for their pain-relieving and anti-inflammatory properties. What's incredible is that we now know willow bark contains salicin, the active ingredient that aspirin is derived from. The Egyptians, through sheer trial and error, had unlocked one of nature's most potent painkillers thousands of years before the invention of modern pharmacology. It's a stunning example of empirical science at work. Beyond the fields and gardens, Egyptian physicians also looked beneath the earth for their cures, utilizing a surprising variety of minerals. One of the most iconic examples is their use of malachite. This vibrant green copper ore was finely ground into a powder. What for, you ask? Eye makeup. But it wasn't just for cosmetic reasons, like the famous kohl eyeliner. The Egyptians believed the green eye paint, made from malachite, had protective and healing properties. They used it to treat eye infections and ailments. And while it might sound strange, there's a sliver of modern science to it. Copper compounds have antimicrobial properties, so it's plausible that this ancient makeup did, in fact, help ward off the rampant eye infections caused by the dust, sand, and flies of the desert environment. It was beauty and medicine, all in one. Another key mineral in their toolkit was natron, a natural salt mixture harvested from dry lake beds. You might know it as the key ingredient in the mummification process, used for its powerful dehydrating properties. But in the physician's pharmacy, it was a versatile cleaning agent. They used it in mouthwashes to cleanse the mouth and freshen breath, and as an antiseptic to clean wounds. It was the ancient world's version of hydrogen peroxide or rubbing alcohol. They recognized its ability to dry out and purify, applying that principle to both the living and the dead. This dual use highlights their practical, observational approach to the resources around them. They saw a property in a substance and ingeniously applied it to multiple problems. Now let us get into the part that might seem a bit unusual to our modern sensibilities, the use of animal parts. The Egyptian pharmacy was a true nose-to-tail operation, believing that every part of an animal could hold some form of therapeutic power. And at the top of this list, the absolute superstar ingredient was honey. Honey was a gift from the gods, a golden elixir used for just about everything, and they were right to revere it. We now know that honey has incredible natural antiseptic and antibacterial properties. The Egyptians used it extensively in wound dressings. They would apply it directly to cuts and sores to prevent infection and promote healing, creating a protective barrier that kept out germs. It was also a common base for their medicines. Since many herbal remedies were bitter, mixing them with sweet, viscous honey made them much easier to swallow, especially for children. It was a spoonful of sugar that literally helped the medicine go down. But the animal pharmacy didn't stop at honey. They used animal fats as a base for ointments and salves, creating topical treatments that could be applied to the skin. Milk, especially donkey's milk, was used in remedies and was even believed to have cosmetic benefits for the skin, a belief that legends would later attribute to Cleopatra. And sometimes the ingredients got even more specific, and frankly, a bit bizarre. Papyri mention remedies involving everything from lizard blood to crocodile dung. While it's easy to dismiss these as pure magic or superstition, it's important to remember their mindset. They were operating on centuries of observation. Perhaps they noticed that animals didn't get sick after rolling in dung, leading them to believe it had protective qualities. It's a logic, even if the science wasn't quite there yet. This willingness to experiment with anything and everything shows the relentless pursuit of effective treatments. What's truly remarkable when you look at this vast collection of herbs, minerals, and animal products is how the Egyptians combined them. They weren't just using single ingredients. They were master compounders. The Ebers Papyrus, one of our most important medical texts, contains over 800 complex prescriptions. A single remedy might call for a specific measure of ground cenopods mixed with honey, and perhaps a small amount of a mineral, all blended together to treat a specific ailment. They understood dosage, writing down precise amounts like 1/16th of a portion. They understood different methods of delivery, creating pills, potions, ointments, suppositories, and even inhalations where the patient would breathe in the smoke of therapeutic herbs. This was not random guesswork. It was a highly organized, systematic approach to medicine. Through thousands of years of observation, passed down from one physician to the next, they built a truly encyclopedic knowledge of natural remedies. They saw a patient with a cough and knew to prescribe a concoction with carob. They saw a wound and reached for the honey. They saw an eye infection and ground up malachite. While their explanations often involved gods and magic, their practical application of these remedies was surprisingly effective. They were demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of therapeutic properties long before we had the chemistry to explain why it worked. Their pharmacy was a bridge between the spiritual and the practical, a place where nature's bounty was transformed into the hope for healing. When you think of ancient civilizations, hygiene and public health probably aren't the first words that come to mind. We often imagine dusty, crowded cities. But what if I told you that one ancient society was way ahead of its time, pioneering concepts that we still value today? I'm talking about the ancient Egyptians. They understood something fundamental. Prevention is far better than cure. Their approach to wellness wasn't just about treating sickness with spells and remedies. It was deeply rooted in maintaining a clean and healthy environment. Let's start with personal cleanliness. For the Egyptians, being clean was next to godliness, quite literally. Priests were required to bathe multiple times a day in sacred pools to be pure enough to serve the gods. But this wasn't just for the elite. Regular bathing was a common practice for everyone who could access the Nile or local canals. They used a form of soap made from animal fats or vegetable oils mixed with natron, a type of salt. Think of it as their version of an all-natural exfoliating body wash. They were obsessed with being clean and smelling good. And speaking of smelling good, let's talk about ancient Egyptian perfume and cosmetics. This wasn't just about vanity. They used perfumes, oils, and deodorants made from flowers and spices like lily, myrrh, and cinnamon. These weren't just to smell pleasant. They believed these scents had protective and healing properties. They also used kohl eyeliner, not just for that iconic look, but because they believed it helped protect their eyes from the harsh sun and ward off eye infections. So that dramatic cat eye wasn't just a fashion statement. It was practical preventative medicine. Now let's zoom out from the individual to the community. Egyptian cities, especially those built for the workers of the Great Pyramids like Deir el-Medina, show evidence of surprisingly sophisticated urban planning. They understood the importance of separating living quarters from waste. Archaeologists have found evidence of designated waste disposal areas and systems to channel away dirty water. While they didn't have underground sewer pipes like the Romans, they had developed methods to manage waste and keep their living spaces relatively clean, a crucial step in preventing the spread of disease. They also had a keen understanding of the importance of clean water. The Nile was their lifeblood, but they knew that stagnant or contaminated water could bring sickness. Papyri describe methods for purifying water, and tomb paintings often depict people using siphons to draw cleaner water from the top layers of a vessel, leaving the sediment at the bottom. This simple but effective technique shows an intuitive grasp of basic sanitation principles. They were actively trying to ensure the water they drank was as safe as possible. This focus on hygiene extended to their food as well. They had rules about food preparation and storage to prevent spoilage, especially in the hot climate. They used salt to preserve fish and meat, and granaries were designed to protect grain from pests and moisture. By ensuring their food supply was safe, they were taking another massive step in public health, reducing the risk of foodborne illnesses that could devastate a community. It shows a holistic view of health, connecting personal habits, the environment, and diet. So, why did the Egyptians place such a strong emphasis on all this? It was a blend of practicality, religious belief, and a genuine understanding of health. They observed that cleaner environments and cleaner bodies led to fewer illnesses. Their gods favored purity, so being clean was a way to honor them and maintain cosmic order, or mat. They saw the human body as a temple for the soul, and it was one's duty to keep that temple pure and intact, both in this life and for the journey into the afterlife. This preventative mindset is what makes them true pioneers. While their medical knowledge had its limits, their focus on public health and hygiene was revolutionary. They laid the groundwork for ideas that would take other civilizations centuries, even millennia, to fully grasp. The simple act of washing your hands, ensuring clean water, and keeping your living space tidy are all legacies of this ancient wisdom. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most effective health measures are the simplest ones. So, the next time you see those iconic images of ancient Egyptians, remember there's so much more beneath the surface. They weren't just pyramid builders and pharaohs. They were public health innovators who understood that a healthy society starts with prevention, cleanliness, and care. Their legacy isn't just written in stone. It's in the very habits we practice every day for our own well-being. Have you ever wondered if ancient doctors had a secret weapon? Well, the Egyptians certainly did, and it wasn't just herbs and scalpels. It was magic. While we often praise ancient Egypt for its surprisingly advanced medical knowledge, think brain surgery and detailed anatomical texts, we can't ignore the other, more mystical side of their healing practices. For them, medicine wasn't just about what you could see and touch. It was a holistic art that blended the scientific with the spiritual. So, let's paint a picture. Imagine you're an ancient Egyptian suffering from a nasty fever. You call for the physician, or Swinu as they were known. He arrives, examines you, and perhaps prescribes a specific herbal remedy, maybe a tea made from willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. Sounds pretty logical, right? But that was only half the treatment. As the physician prepared the medicine, he wouldn't just be mixing ingredients. He'd also be chanting. These weren't just random words. They were powerful spells, specific incantations designed to banish the demon or evil spirit believed to be causing your illness. The words themselves were seen as a form of medicine, activating the healing properties of the herbs and appealing to a higher power for aid. This brings us to the divine helpers in the Egyptian medical toolkit. The gods and goddesses were central to health. The most famous healing deity was Sekhmet, the fierce lioness goddess. She was a dual-natured figure. She could bring plague and pestilence, but she could also take it away. Priests of Sekhmet were specialized healers who worked to appease her and channel her protective powers. If you were sick, a prayer or an offering to Sekhmet was just as important as taking your prescribed medicine. Other deities played crucial roles too. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, was believed to be the source of all medical knowledge and the author of sacred healing texts. Isis, the great mother goddess, was a powerful magician whose spells could restore life and health. Patients would often pray to these gods, hoping for their divine intervention. It was a team effort. The doctor treated the body, and the gods handled the spiritual battle. But the magic didn't stop with chants and prayers. Amulets were a huge part of everyday health and protection. These weren't just pretty pieces of jewelry. They were objects imbued with magical power. The ankh, a famous symbol of life, was a popular choice, believed to promote vitality and longevity. The Eye of Horus, or a jet, was another powerful protective symbol, representing healing, restoration, and well-being. It was often worn by the living to ward off sickness, and placed on the dead to ensure their safe passage and regeneration in the afterlife. These amulets could be made from various materials, like faience, carnelian, or lapis lazuli, with the color and material often having its own symbolic meaning. You might wear an amulet around your neck, tie it to your wrist, or even have one placed directly on a wound or afflicted part of your body. The idea was that the amulet created a protective field, a magical barrier that evil forces couldn't penetrate. So, were the Egyptians just being superstitious? Not in their eyes. For them, the world was a place where the physical and the supernatural were constantly interacting. An injury from a scorpion wasn't just a physical wound from venom. It was also a magical attack. Therefore, the treatment had to address both. You'd need a poultice to draw out the poison, but you'd also need a spell to neutralize the scorpion's malevolent magic, perhaps invoking the goddess Circuit, the divine protector against venomous creatures. This dual approach is beautifully illustrated in the medical papyri that have survived, like the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus. While the Edwin Smith Papyrus is famous for its incredibly rational, almost modern, approach to traumatic injuries, describing examinations and treatments with surgical precision, other texts are filled with magical spells right alongside herbal recipes. For example, a remedy for a headache might list several plants to be ground and applied to the head, followed immediately by the exact magical formula to be recited 4 times over the patient. The recipe and the spell were a single, inseparable prescription. One was for the body, the other was for the spirit, and you absolutely needed both for a complete cure. The Egyptians understood that a person's state of mind and spiritual well-being were intrinsically linked to their physical health. A frightened or spiritually vulnerable patient was less likely to recover. The rituals, spells, and amulets provided comfort, hope, and a sense of control in a world full of dangers, both seen and unseen. This is what we now call a holistic approach to health. It's the idea that you can't just treat a symptom. You have to treat the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. The Egyptians were masters of this. They recognized that healing was a complex process that required a multifaceted approach. The physician's empirical knowledge addressed the tangible ailment, while the priest's magic addressed the fear, anxiety, and spiritual imbalance that came with it. They didn't see a contradiction between science and magic. They were 2 sides of the same coin, 2 essential tools for restoring balance, or mat, which was the fundamental order of the universe. Sickness was a form of chaos, a disruption of that balance. Therefore, healing was an act of restoring order, using every method available, from the most practical remedy to the most powerful divine utterance. It was a beautiful, complex, and deeply human system that saw the patient not as a collection of symptoms, but as a complete being, existing in both the physical and the divine worlds. Ever wondered what a doctor's visit was like 4,000 years ago? Forget modern machines and labs. In ancient Egypt, the physician's most powerful tool was their own mind, their keen senses, and sharp judgment. At the very core of their medical practice was a surprisingly systematic approach to diagnosis and prognosis. It wasn't just guesswork or magic. It was a methodical process of observation and prediction. Imagine walking into an ancient Egyptian clinic. A physician, known as a Sinui, would greet you. They wouldn't just ask what's wrong. They would begin a meticulous examination. They'd carefully listen to your complaints, observe the color of your skin, the clarity of your eyes, and the nature of any wounds or swellings. They would feel your pulse, not just to see if your heart was beating, but to understand its rhythm and strength, which they believed carried vital information about the body's internal state. They would even pay attention to the smell of your breath or your sweat, looking for any clues about what was happening inside. This was a head-to-toe clinical examination, a sensory deep dive into your physical condition. The Egyptians had a sophisticated understanding that different symptoms pointed to different illnesses. They weren't just lumping everything together. The medical papyri, like the famous Ebers Papyrus and Edwin Smith Papyrus, are filled with detailed case studies. These texts are like ancient medical textbooks, outlining specific conditions with remarkable clarity. For example, a doctor might note a patient has a burning in their stomach or heaviness in their limbs. They described tumors, fractures, and even what we might recognize today as symptoms of heart disease or diabetes. But diagnosis was only half the battle. What came next was perhaps the most crucial part, the prognosis. This was the physician's judgment, their prediction of the patient's future. After the examination, the doctor would declare one of 3 verdicts using very specific and standardized phrases. The first was, "An ailment which I will treat." This was a confident statement. It meant the physician recognized the illness, had a remedy in mind, and believed a full recovery was likely. This was the best-case scenario for any patient. The second verdict was, "An ailment with which I will contend." This was a more cautious prognosis. It suggested the illness was serious, and the outcome was uncertain. The physician was willing to fight the disease, to try various treatments, but they made no promises of a cure. This category likely included chronic conditions or severe infections where the doctor knew it would be a long and difficult battle. It shows an honest and realistic approach to the limitations of their medicine. Finally, there was the most dreaded verdict: an ailment not to be treated. This was not a statement of giving up, but a recognition of futility. The physician, through their experience and observation, had determined that the condition was fatal. In these cases, they wouldn't subject the patient to painful or pointless procedures. Instead, the focus would shift to palliative care, making the patient as comfortable as possible in their final days. This ethical consideration, this decision to not inflict further suffering when a cure is impossible, is a profoundly modern concept. This three-tiered system of prognosis, I will treat, I will contend, and not to be treated, is incredibly significant. It demonstrates that Egyptian medicine wasn't just a collection of magical spells. It was a rational, evidence-based system. Doctors made decisions based on observable facts and past experience. They categorized illnesses based on treatability, showing a logical framework for patient care. They understood that not all diseases were the same, and that different approaches were necessary. Let's look at the Edwin Smith Papyrus, which deals primarily with trauma and surgery. It contains 48 case studies, each laid out in the same logical format: title, examination, diagnosis, and treatment. For a case of a head wound, the text might describe the physician palpating the skull to feel for a fracture. Based on what they feel, they would then deliver their prognosis. If the skull was fractured and the brain exposed, it would almost certainly be classified as an ailment not to be treated. But a simple scalp wound? An ailment which I will treat. This systematic approach is the hallmark of a scientific mind at work. This methodology allowed for the accumulation and transfer of medical knowledge. By recording cases with their diagnoses and outcomes, Egyptian physicians were creating a database of medical wisdom. A young doctor could study these papyri and learn from the experiences of generations of physicians before them. They could learn to recognize the signs of a treatable condition versus a terminal one, refining their own diagnostic skills. It was a system built for learning and improvement, not just static tradition. So the next time you picture an ancient Egyptian doctor, don't just think of spells and amulets. Picture a skilled clinician, a careful observer, and a thoughtful pragmatist. Picture someone using their senses to understand the human body, using logic to predict the course of a disease, and using a clear, ethical framework to decide the best course of action for their patient. This systematic approach to diagnosis and prognosis laid a foundation for the rational medicine that would later flourish with the Greeks and eventually evolve into the medicine we know today. The judgment of the Swanu was the true heart of this ancient practice. Have you ever heard the saying, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food"? While often attributed to the Greek physician Hippocrates, this concept was already deeply embedded in the daily life and medical practices of ancient Egypt, thousands of years earlier. The Egyptians had a profound understanding that what you eat directly impacts your health, a concept that feels incredibly modern, hasn't it? Today, we're going to journey back in time, not just to look at pyramids and pharaohs, but to sit at the ancient Egyptian table and uncover their secrets to using food as medicine. Imagine this. You're feeling unwell in ancient Thebes. Instead of a pharmacist, you visit a physician, a Swanwi, who, after examining you, doesn't just hand you a magical amulet. Instead, they might prescribe a specific diet. Perhaps you're told to eat more figs to aid digestion, or chew on garlic for its protective properties. This wasn't just folklore. It was a cornerstone of their medical system. They saw the human body as a holistic system, where balance was key, and diet was one of the primary tools to maintain or restore that balance. This wasn't just about curing sickness. It was about preventing it in the first place. So, what was on the menu in ancient Egypt? The foundation of their diet was built on the incredible fertility of the Nile River Valley. Their staple crops were emmer wheat and barley. These grains were absolute powerhouses of nutrition. They weren't just for making bread and beer, though they certainly made plenty of both. They were a reliable source of carbohydrates for energy, fiber for digestive health, and essential B vitamins. The Egyptians would grind these grains into flour to make a variety of flatbreads, which were a part of nearly every meal, from the humble farmer to the mighty pharaoh. Think of it as their version of a daily multivitamin, baked right into their bread. But it wasn't all carbs. The Egyptians supplemented their grain-based diet with a rich variety of fruits and vegetables, all thanks to their sophisticated irrigation systems. Picture bustling markets overflowing with fresh produce. They had dates, figs, and grapes, which were not only sweet treats, but also packed with natural sugars for a quick energy boost and antioxidants. Pomegranates were particularly prized, not just for their taste, but also for their symbolic connection to prosperity and their perceived health benefits, which modern science is now confirming. On the vegetable side, they cultivated onions, garlic, leeks, lettuce, radishes, and lentils. Garlic and onions, in particular, were revered. We have records showing that the laborers who built the Great Pyramids were given daily rations of garlic and onions, believed to bolster their strength, stamina, and protect them from disease. It was the original superfood combo. And what about protein? While many ordinary Egyptians ate a largely plant-based diet, protein was definitely available. The Nile River was a bountiful source of fish, which was a common part of the diet for all social classes. They would eat it fresh or salt and dry it for later use. Poultry, like ducks and geese, were also raised. For the wealthier Egyptians, beef and mutton were on the table, often enjoyed during festivals and special occasions. For everyone else, legumes like lentils and chickpeas were an excellent and affordable source of plant-based protein, helping to build and repair tissues, just as we use them today. This combination of grains, vegetables, fruits, and varied protein sources created a remarkably balanced and nutrient-dense diet. Medical papyri, like the famous Ebers Papyrus, which is one of the oldest and most important medical documents from ancient Egypt, are filled with prescriptions that are essentially recipes. For example, to treat digestive issues, a physician might recommend a diet rich in figs and dates, known for their high fiber content. To combat infections, they might prescribe concoctions containing honey, and they were onto something. We now know that honey has natural antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. They recommended celery for rheumatism and pomegranates for intestinal worms. It's fascinating to see this ancient wisdom, this intuitive understanding of nutritional science, laid out in texts that are thousands of years old. This shows us that the Egyptian approach to health was incredibly proactive. They didn't just wait for sickness to strike. They believed in Mayat, a concept of order, balance, and harmony in the universe, which extended to the human body. Eating a balanced diet was a way to maintain your personal Ma'at. It was a daily ritual of self-care. Think about that for a moment. Every meal is an opportunity to strengthen your body, to align yourself with the principles of health and harmony. It's a powerful and beautiful way to look at food. This holistic view, where diet, medicine, and well-being are all interconnected, is a powerful lesson from the past. In our modern world, we often separate our food from our medicine, but the Egyptians teach us that they are two sides of the same coin. They understood that the foundation of a healthy life is built plate by plate, meal by meal. They were true pioneers of nutritional science, using their kitchens as their first pharmacies. Their legacy isn't just carved in stone. It's also found in the simple, powerful idea that food is medicine. So the next time you're chopping an onion or enjoying a handful of dates, take a moment to connect with this ancient wisdom. You're participating in a tradition of nourishment and healing that has sustained humanity for millennia. What we can learn from the Egyptians is that paying attention to what we eat is one of the most powerful things we can do for our health. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the banks of the Nile. Ever wondered what healthcare was like for women thousands of years ago? Well, let's travel back to ancient Egypt, where things were surprisingly progressive. Unlike many other ancient societies, Egypt offered remarkable opportunities for women in the medical field. This wasn't just a footnote in their history. Women were vital contributors, working as respected healers and midwives. Imagine a world where female physicians practiced right alongside their male counterparts. It sounds modern, but evidence suggests this was a reality along the Nile. We have records and inscriptions that point to women not just practicing medicine, but also receiving formal medical training. This level of inclusion in a highly specialized field was truly ahead of its time. The most prominent role for women in medicine, however, was that of the midwife. In a society that deeply valued family and children, childbirth was a hugely significant event. And who was at the heart of it all? The midwife. These women weren't just assisting. They were skilled practitioners, managing the entire process of labor and delivery. Their expertise was essential for the health and survival of both mother and child. They possessed a deep knowledge of herbal remedies to ease pain, new techniques to manage difficult births, and performed important postnatal care rituals. They were the backbone of women's and children's health care. Their presence ensured that women were cared for by other women, creating an environment of trust and understanding during one of life's most vulnerable moments. This specialized role was not just respected, it was indispensable to the well-being of the entire community. When we look at medical papyri, ancient Egypt's medical textbooks, we find entire sections dedicated to gynecology, obstetrics, and women's health. While these texts were likely written and read by male physicians as well, their detailed content suggests a sophisticated understanding of female health issues. It's highly probable that this knowledge was shared with and practiced by female healers and midwives. They would have been the primary users of this information in their day-to-day work. These texts cover everything from fertility tests to contraceptives and treatments for various gynecological conditions. For instance, a common fertility test involved a woman urinating on barley and emmer wheat seeds. If the barley sprouted, it was thought she would have a boy. If the emmer grew, a girl. If neither grew, she wasn't pregnant. Surprisingly, modern science has found that the urine of pregnant women can indeed promote seed germination, so they were onto something. So, what does this all tell us? It shows that ancient Egyptian society recognized and valued the medical contributions of women. They weren't relegated to the sidelines. Instead, they were integral parts of the healthcare system, holding positions of skill and authority. Their work as healers and midwives ensured the health of generations and highlights a remarkably inclusive aspect of Egyptian history. While the names of many of these women have been lost to time, their legacy lives on in the evidence they left behind. They were pioneers, paving the way in a field that, in many other parts of the world, would exclude women for centuries to come. The story of women in Egyptian medicine is a powerful reminder that progress isn't always a straight line, and that some ancient societies were more forward-thinking than we often give them credit for. Life along the Nile wasn't always idyllic. It was a constant battle against a host of unseen enemies. Despite their impressive knowledge of medicine, the ancient Egyptians were not immune to the diseases and disabilities that plagued the ancient world. In this episode, we'll uncover the harsh realities of health and illness, exploring the ailments they faced and the remarkable ways they tried to cope. Let's start with the evidence. How do we know what diseases they suffered from? Much of our knowledge comes directly from the people themselves, or rather, their remains. Paleopathologists, scientists who study diseases in ancient populations, have examined countless mummies and skeletons, and their findings paint a vivid and often grim picture. Skeletal remains show clear signs of debilitating conditions. For example, tuberculosis, a severe respiratory disease, left its mark on the spines and bones of many Egyptians, causing deformities and immense pain. This condition, sometimes called Pott's disease, would have been a chronic and difficult burden to bear. Another common foe was arthritis, particularly osteoarthritis. Imagine spending your days engaged in hard physical labor farming, building monuments, or hauling heavy goods. Over time, this repetitive strain took a toll on their joints. Skeletons frequently show evidence of worn-down cartilage and bony growths, especially in the spine, hips, and knees. For many, this meant living with constant, grinding pain and reduced mobility. While they had remedies to soothe the discomfort, there was no cure, and it was a reality for a significant portion of the population, especially as they aged. Infections were a constant threat in a world without antibiotics. A simple cut from a farming tool or a wound from a construction accident could easily become life-threatening. Dental health was another major issue. Their diet, which included bread made with stone-ground flour, often contained grit and sand. This wore down their teeth at an alarming rate, leading to abscesses, infections, and tooth loss. Dental abscesses could be excruciatingly painful, and if the infection spread, could even be fatal. Mummies often reveal jaws riddled with these painful conditions, a silent testament to their suffering. Parasitic infections were also rampant. Living so close to the Nile and its irrigation canals exposed the Egyptians to waterborne parasites. One of the most notorious was schistosomiasis, a debilitating disease caused by parasitic flatworms. These parasites could enter the body through the skin when a person was wading in contaminated water. The infection would cause symptoms like blood in the urine, a condition so common it was mentioned in medical papyri and could lead to long-term damage to internal organs, like the bladder and kidneys. This was simply a part of life for many who worked and lived by the water. Childhood was a particularly perilous time. Infant and child mortality rates were tragically high. Malnutrition was a persistent problem, which weakened children's immune systems and made them more susceptible to deadly diseases. Conditions like anemia, often caused by poor diet and parasitic infections, are frequently detected in the bones of children and women. Skeletons also show evidence of diseases like polio, which could cause paralysis and lifelong disability, and smallpox, a deadly viral infection that left its telltale scars on some mummified remains. Surviving to adulthood was a significant achievement in itself. So, how did they fight back? The ancient Egyptians didn't just passively accept their fate. They had a sophisticated medical system for their time, blending practical treatments with magical and religious rituals. The Ebers Papyrus and other medical texts list hundreds of remedies for various ailments. They used honey, with its natural antibacterial properties, to treat wounds. They had surgical instruments for basic procedures, like setting broken bones and lancing boils. They created splints for fractures, some of which are remarkably similar to those used today. They also understood the importance of hygiene to some extent, with priests and physicians emphasizing cleanliness. However, their knowledge had its limits. They had no concept of germs or viruses. Epidemic diseases, which could sweep through the population with devastating speed, were often interpreted as punishments from the gods or the work of malevolent spirits. While their practical remedies might have helped manage symptoms, they were powerless against large-scale outbreaks of diseases like plague or smallpox. For chronic conditions like severe arthritis or cancer, which has also been found in mummies, their treatments could only offer palliative care easing pain rather than providing a cure. They relied heavily on amulets, spells, and prayers to gods like Sekhmet, the goddess of healing and disease, to protect them. Disability was also a visible part of Egyptian society. Skeletal remains and artistic depictions show individuals who lived with physical deformities, whether from birth defects, diseases like polio, or injuries. We see portrayals of people with dwarfism, for example, who were not always outcasts. Some held respected positions in households and even at the royal court. This suggests a degree of social integration. People with disabilities adapted as best they could. We found evidence of prosthetic devices, like a remarkably crafted wooden toe found on a mummy, designed to help with balance and allow for a more normal life. These ingenious solutions demonstrate their resilience and desire to overcome physical limitations. In conclusion, the story of health in ancient Egypt is one of profound resilience. They were a people who understood suffering intimately. From the chronic pain of arthritis to the sudden terror of an epidemic, illness was a shadow that loomed over everyone. Yet they faced these challenges with ingenuity and determination. Their medical practices, though a mix of science and magic, represent one of humanity's earliest organized attempts to understand the body and fight disease. The skeletons and mummies they left behind are not just relics. They are human stories, reminding us of the fragility of life and the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. Their struggle for health is a timeless one, connecting us to their world across thousands of years. We're delving into a topic that is both a little macabre and incredibly enlightening: mummification and its surprising connection to the study of anatomy. Now, we often think of mummification purely in a religious context. It was all about preparing the deceased for their journey into the afterlife, a sacred and vital ritual. But what if I told you that this holy process inadvertently became one of history's earliest anatomy lessons? Let's unwrap that idea. The primary goal was never scientific study. There were no white coats or lecture halls. But think about it. The embalmers, the priests who performed these rites, were getting a hands-on internal view of the human body that almost no one else in the ancient world had. Picture the scene inside an embalmer's workshop, a place the Egyptians called the wabat, or pure place. With meticulous care and specialized tools, they would make a small incision in the left side of the abdomen. From there, they had to reach in and carefully remove the internal organs: the stomach, the intestines, the liver, and the lungs. Each organ was individually washed, dried with natron salt, and placed in its own special container, a canopic jar, to be buried with the mummy. This process alone provided an unparalleled, tangible understanding of where these organs were located, their relative sizes, and their textures. They weren't just abstract concepts anymore. They were physical objects the embalmers handled every day. They learned, for example, that the intestines were a long, coiled tube and that the liver was a large, solid organ. This was practical, working knowledge. One organ, however, was famously left in place: the heart. The Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and memory, the very essence of a person. It was so crucial that it had to remain in the body to be weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth, in the final judgment. By leaving the heart, they learned its central position in the chest cavity, connected to a network of major vessels. But what about the brain? Well, the Egyptians didn't hold it in very high regard. They thought it was just a sort of cranial stuffing. Their method for removing it was, shall we say, direct. They would insert a long hooked rod up through the nostrils, break through the thin ethmoid bone, and essentially whisk the brain into a liquid state so it could drain out. While this sounds brutal, it taught them that the cranial cavity contained a soft, pulpy substance. They might not have understood its function, but they certainly knew it was there. So, while the intention was spiritual, the side effect was anatomical education. This practical experience, gained over thousands of years and countless mummifications, built a collective, albeit basic, knowledge of human internal structure. It wasn't formal medical training, but it was a unique window into the hidden world inside the body. Now let's connect this to their medical practices. How did this mummification-based knowledge translate to treating the living? Well, it's a bit complicated. The Egyptians had a dualistic view of medicine. On one hand, they had very practical surgical approaches, likely informed by observations of battlefield injuries and accidents. They could set broken bones, stitch wounds, and even perform simple surgeries. Seeing the body as internal layout during embalming would have given them a certain confidence in knowing what lies beneath the skin. For example, when dealing with a deep abdominal wound, a physician who had seen the arrangement of organs inside a mummy would have a better mental map of what might be damaged. They might not have been able to perform complex internal surgery, but their understanding was far from zero. However, on the other hand, a huge part of their medicine was magical and religious. They believed many illnesses were caused by angry gods, malevolent spirits, or curses. For these ailments, the treatment wasn't a scalpel, but a spell, an amulet, or a prayer. So, their anatomical knowledge coexisted with a deep belief in the supernatural. They might know where the liver was, but if a patient had liver disease, they might be just as likely to blame a demon as to consider a physical cause. It's also worth noting that the process was highly ritualized and specialized. The priests who performed embalming weren't the same people as the soins, the doctors who treated the sick. There wasn't necessarily a direct transfer of knowledge from the embalming tent to the doctor's clinic. The information likely spread more slowly, through cultural osmosis rather than formal teaching. Let's also consider other potential sources of anatomical knowledge. Trauma was a big one. Seeing a soldier with a severe chest wound would offer a stark, if tragic, view of the lungs and heart. Workplace accidents, common in the construction of massive monuments, would have also provided brutal lessons in the structure of bones, muscles, and organs. What about autopsies for the purpose of investigation? These were extremely rare, if they happened at all. The concept of dissecting a body purely for scientific knowledge was foreign and would have been seen as a desecration. The body needed to be whole for the afterlife. Mummification was a form of sacred dissection where the goal was preservation, not investigation. It was a means to an end, and that end was eternal life. So, in essence, mummification was an accidental anatomy school. It provided a foundation of knowledge that, while not always applied in a modern scientific way, set the ancient Egyptians apart. They knew more about what was inside the human body than any other civilization for thousands of years to come. Their understanding was a unique blend of practical observation from the embalmer's table and the battlefield, all filtered through a deep spiritual and magical worldview. This knowledge wasn't perfect. They made mistakes, like misunderstanding the function of the brain. But they were pioneers. The careful removal, handling, and preservation of the organs was a form of hands-on learning that was simply unprecedented. It demystified the internal body, even if their ultimate explanations remained rooted in the divine. Let's move beyond the papyri, the scalpels, and the incantations, and focus on the one thing that connects us directly to them across thousands of years, the human heart. Because at its core, this entire system wasn't just about procedures or potions. It was about people. Real people with fears, pains, and hopes just like us. Can you imagine it? Picture a bustling construction site near the Great Pyramids. A stoneworker, let's call him Kenneman, missteps and feels a sharp, agonizing pain in his leg. His friends carry him to the soins, the physician. He's terrified. Will he ever walk again? Will he be able to provide for his family? The physician calmly examines the injury, a clean fracture. He realigns the bone, applies a splint of wood and linen, and gives Kenneman a paste of willow bark for the pain. Days later, the swelling goes down. Weeks later, he takes his first tentative steps. That feeling of relief, that gratitude for healing, that's universal. Or think about a young mother, Merritt, whose child is burning with a fever. She's been up all night, placing cool cloths on her daughter's forehead, her heart aching with every pained whimper. She brings a small offering to the temple of Sekhmet, the goddess of healing, praying with every fiber of her being for her child's recovery. She then visits the local healer, who gives her a concoction of herbs and honey. When the fever finally breaks and her daughter's eyes open, clear and bright, can you feel that wave of overwhelming joy? That deep, profound hope fulfilled is a feeling that transcends time. These aren't just stories. They are the silent narratives behind every medical papyrus. The Ebers Papyrus contains over 700 magical formulas and remedies. But behind each one is a person. A person suffering from a cough, a stomach ache, a skin ailment. A person who felt unwell, sought help, and placed their trust in a healer. They felt the same anxiety we feel when waiting for a diagnosis, the same vulnerability when placing our health in someone else's hands, and the same deep-seated desire to simply feel better, to be whole again. The ancient Egyptians looked at the stars and saw gods. They looked at the Nile and saw life itself. And when they looked at a sick or injured person, they didn't just see a collection of symptoms. They saw a soul in distress. They saw a family in pain. Their medicine was a fascinating blend of science and magic, of practical knowledge and spiritual belief. But this blend was created for one purpose: to care, to ease suffering, to restore balance to a life thrown into chaos by illness. When we look at a mummy in a museum, it's easy to see it as an artifact, an object of historical curiosity. But that was once a living, breathing person. They loved, they laughed, they worked, and they worried. They may have suffered from arthritis or dental problems, or survived a childhood illness thanks to the care of a soigneur. Their bones tell a story of a life lived, a story of sickness and often of recovery. The human experience of illness is a powerful unifier. It doesn't matter if you in a modern hospital with an MRI machine or in an ancient Egyptian clinic with linen bandages and honey. The fear of the unknown, the pain in your body, and the desperate hope for a cure are exactly the same. The drive to care for the sick, to comfort the suffering, and to fight for life is one of the most fundamental aspects of our shared humanity. The Egyptians' legacy isn't just in the pyramids they built, but in this timeless dedication to healing. They laid a foundation, not just for the science of medicine, but for the art of compassionate care. They remind us that behind every medical chart, every prescription, and every procedure, there is a human story. A story of suffering, of resilience, and of the enduring, incredible hope for a better, healthier tomorrow. We've explored their surgical tools, their intricate pharmacopoeia, and their surprisingly advanced understanding of the human body. But what happened to all that knowledge? Did it simply vanish with the last pharaoh? Absolutely not. In fact, the story of Egyptian medicine is far from over. Its legacy is one of the most enduring and influential in human history, a golden thread woven through the very fabric of modern healthcare. So, let's trace that thread. Picture this: the bustling libraries of Alexandria, a melting pot of cultures and ideas. Here, a young Greek physician, someone like the legendary Hippocrates, pores over papyrus scrolls translated from Egyptian hieroglyphs. He's not just reading about mystical incantations. He's studying detailed anatomical observations, clinical case studies, and a vast collection of remedies tested over millennia. The Egyptians were masters of observation. Their methods of diagnosis inspecting a patient, listening to their heart, checking their pulse were revolutionary. These practices, once confined to the banks of the Nile, were now being absorbed, debated, and adopted by the brightest minds of the ancient world. It's fascinating to see how specific Egyptian ideas traveled. The concept of channels, or mechu, in the body, which the Egyptians believed carried air, water, and tears, bears a striking resemblance to the Greek concept of the four humors. While the theories evolved, the foundational idea of an internal system that needs to be kept in balance is a direct intellectual inheritance. Greek physicians didn't just copy the Egyptians. They built upon their foundation. They took the practical, observation-based approach of the Egyptians and began to fuse it with their own philosophical inquiries, separating medicine further from the purely divine and moving it towards a scientific discipline. This knowledge transfer didn't stop with the Greeks. As the Roman Empire rose, it absorbed Greek culture, and with it, Egyptian medical wisdom. Roman army surgeons, like some of the most skilled practitioners of their time, utilized techniques for setting bones and treating wounds that had clear Egyptian origins. Think about the surgical instruments we've seen, the scalpels, the forceps. You can see their direct descendants in the toolkits of Roman doctors. The Romans, masters of engineering and public health, also appreciated the Egyptian emphasis on cleanliness and hygiene, even if their understanding of germ theory was centuries away. The knowledge flowed from the Nile, through Athens, and into the heart of Rome, becoming a cornerstone of classical medicine. But what about today? Does any of this ancient wisdom still matter in age of MRI machines and gene therapy? You'd be surprised. The very spirit of modern medicine, the clinical method, has its roots in ancient Egypt. The process of observing symptoms, making a diagnosis, prescribing a treatment, and then noting the prognosis is exactly what we see in texts like the Edwin Smith Papyrus. It's the scientific method in its infancy. Furthermore, many of the plant-based remedies used by the Egyptians are still being studied today. Willow bark, which they used for pain, contains salicin, the active ingredient in aspirin. Honey, used as an antiseptic Padros dressing, is now recognized for its powerful antimicrobial properties. Modern pharmacology is, in a way, rediscovering the wisdom that the Egyptians knew thousands of years ago. Their understanding of anatomy, though limited by their religious beliefs about dissection, was still far ahead of its time. By studying the mummification process, they gained a practical, hands-on knowledge of the body's internal organs. They knew the heart was a central pump, and they had names for many major organs. This anatomical knowledge, preserved in their writings, provided a crucial starting point for later physicians like Galen, whose work would dominate Western medical thought for over 1,000 years. Without the Egyptians' initial daring explorations of the human interior, our own journey to understanding our bodies would have been much, much slower. So, as we conclude our series, Beyond the Tomb, it's as clear that the genius of ancient Egypt wasn't just in building pyramids or mastering the afterlife. Their greatest, most enduring monument might just be their contribution to human health. They were the world's first true doctors, the pioneers who took the first critical steps away from pure magic and towards a rational, observational approach to healing. Their knowledge wasn't buried with them. It was a seed that they planted, which has grown and branched out over centuries to form the great tree of modern medicine. The echoes of their medical chants can still be heard in the quiet, sterile halls of our hospitals. The wisdom of the papyrus scrolls lives on in our medical textbooks. Their legacy proves that while cities may have crumbled to ruins, the secrets of their sophisticated healthcare continue to resonate, healing and helping us to this very day. And so, our journey through Beyond the Tomb, ancient Egyptian healthcare secrets, draws to a close. After peeling back the layers of time, what have we discovered? We've unearthed the civilization that, while famous for its obsession with the afterlife, was profoundly dedicated to the health and well-being of the living. This wasn't just a culture of pyramids and pharaohs. It was a culture of healers, thinkers, and innovators. We began in the hallowed halls of the Pur Ankh, the houses of life, where the world's earliest physicians were trained. These weren't mystics chanting incantations over the sick. They were scholars, meticulously studying, documenting, and teaching a rational form of medicine. They were pioneers, laying the very groundwork for medical education as we know it. From there, we witnessed their astonishing surgical prowess. Remember the Edwin Smith Papyrus? It's not a book of spells, but a clinical, methodical surgical textbook. It detailed 48 cases of trauma, from skull fractures to spinal injuries, with diagnoses, prognoses, and treatments. They set broken bones with splints, sutured wounds with needle and thread, and even performed trepanation drilling into the skull. The precision and care they took, thousands of years before modern anesthesia or antiseptics, is simply mind-boggling. They understood the importance of a clean environment and used natural antiseptics like willow bark and honey, demonstrating an early intuitive grasp of hygiene that was centuries ahead of its time. Then we explored their vast and complex pharmacy. Imagine a world without chemically synthesized drugs. The Egyptians turned to the natural world around them, creating a pharmacopoeia of over 700 remedies listed in the Ebers Papyrus. They used willow for pain relief, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. They prescribed honey for its antibacterial properties on wounds, castor oil as a laxative, and concoctions of herbs and minerals for everything from digestive issues to eye infections. This wasn't guesswork. It was the result of generations of careful observation, trial, and error, a true proto-scientific method. They documented what worked, what didn't, and in what dosages, creating a comprehensive medical library that was unparalleled in the ancient world. We also delved into areas that feel surprisingly modern. Think about their public health initiatives. They understood the connection between cleanliness and health. The widespread practice of washing, the construction of rudimentary sanitation systems, and the inspection of food, particularly in temple and military environments, show a collective concern for preventing disease. They even recognized the dangers of plagues and had protocols for dealing with outbreaks. This wasn't just about individual care. It was about protecting the community, a concept that forms the very basis of modern public health. And what about specialized care? We saw evidence of dedicated dentists treating gum disease and dental abscesses. They even created primitive dental bridges to secure loose teeth. We looked at the world's oldest known prosthetic, a beautifully crafted wooden toe that wasn't just cosmetic. It was functional, designed to help its owner walk properly. This speaks to a deep empathy, a desire not just to save a life, but to restore a person's quality of life. It's crucial to remember that their medicine was a fascinating blend of science and spirituality. For the Egyptians, the physical and the metaphysical were not separate. A healing prayer could be administered alongside a meticulously prepared herbal remedy. Amulets were worn for protection, but they also set fractures with clinical precision. This duality doesn't diminish their scientific achievements. It enriches them. It shows a holistic approach to healing, treating not just the body, but the entire person, mind, body, and spirit. The legacy of these ancient healers is monumental. Their knowledge didn't vanish with the sands of time. It trickled down through the ages, profoundly influencing the Greeks, including Hippocrates, the father of medicine, and later, the Romans. The Greek medical lexicon is filled with terms derived from Egyptian. Their observational methods, their detailed case studies, and their extensive pharmacopoeia formed a critical foundation upon which Western medicine was built. The tools in a modern surgeon's kit might be made of steel instead of bronze, but the fundamental principles of diagnosis, treatment, and care can be traced back to the banks of the Nile. As we stand here at the end of our series, the image of the ancient Egyptian has hopefully transformed. They were more than just pyramid builders or embalmers preparing the dead. They were lifesavers, pain relievers, and pioneers of human health. They possessed a deep, compassionate understanding of the human body and a relentless drive to alleviate suffering. The secrets that were once locked away in hieroglyphs and papyri now illuminate an extraordinary, and perhaps unexpected, facet of their genius. They remind us that the quest for knowledge and the desire to heal are among the most ancient and noble of all human endeavors. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible exploration of ancient Egyptian healthcare. It has been a privilege to share this journey with you. If you've been as fascinated and inspired by the medical brilliance of this ancient civilization as we have, please show your support by liking this series and sharing it with fellow history enthusiasts and curious minds. And of course, if you want more deep dives into the forgotten corners of the past, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We have so many more stories to tell. Until next time, stay curious.